Well, hello and welcome to, we think, the final episode. I never say definitely. We think the final episode of Informatics in the Round. I'm Kevin Johnson, who had the crazy idea to start this whole thing. And Harris, who are you?
I am Harris Bland, and I'm the crazy person who said, "Hey, can you keep having me on the podcast?"
It was more like, Kevin, I'm funny. I'm funny.
I, I
You need me.
I'm funny. Add me, please. Come on. This is a good topic. Hey, do you have this topic? We should do this topic.
That's exactly right. But it worked.
Yep.
And today, because she has co-hosted at least a couple of times, Ellie Short, who is our production assistant, is coming from behind the scenes to in front of the scenes yet again. So on video, you get to see all of us. We all give a big smile to our video audience. Okay, very good. See, those of you who are just listening are really missing out on a treat.
Exactly. So, 5 years really, right? 5 years of doing this thing. Can you believe that?
I was shocked, and it's been so much fun. I mean, honestly and truthfully, this is one of these things that last year I started thinking 5 years for a modestly successful podcast in our space is really something to be incredibly proud of. But we could do five more, and I could get like a much more marketing. And then I thought, let's let it go. Let's do some good things. There may be another podcast in any of our futures. We may be co-hosting. I may be the co-host now for Harris Bland's podcast on all sorts of interesting things going on in life,
Yeah.
or whatever. So lots of
It's gonna rival Joe Rogan experience for sure.
that's totally doable. I could see that happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, now you have to compete with Kylie Kelsey's podcast too,
Oh,
since she
that's
beat out
true.
Joe Rogan. Yeah.
She beat out Joe Rogan.
Yeah, I think so. Gotta fact check that, but I'm pretty sure.
My go-to podcast right now though is Hidden Brain. That has been awesome recently. I just really like that one.
Yeah, Shankar is awesome. I agree with you. It took me
Yeah,
40 years to know how to pronounce his last name, and I'm not going to try it here either because I'm sure I'll butcher it.
right.
Yeah, Shankar. We'll just call him Shankar. He's our good buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a pal. Ellie's been so kind though to come up with some statistics, kind of like a Spotify Wrapped of the podcast over these years.
Oh, I'm afraid to
So
hear about these.
no, I think these are fantastic. 5 years. So we started December 2019 and went all the way through January 2025. 38 episodes, including this one. 2,468 minutes of podcasting, or 41 hours and 8 minutes.
Wow, it
That's
only felt like 40.
right, right. I like those clean numbers. So do we go to an even 50?
Yeah. We should do a couple more.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
throw a couple more in.
Yeah.
22,000 listeners.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. 22,000 people who now know a little bit more about biomedical informatics and healthcare that might not have known or knew a lot about it and said, they're all wrong.
It could be both of those things. And I would,
Exactly.
I know Bill Hirsch is listening to this, so I would say Bill Hirsch is responsible for like 90% of them because he's about it. So thank you, Bill, for giving us some information.
Yes, absolutely. And we had, mentioning Bill, we had 89 total guests, 86 if we subtract the three of us, and 12 of those were musicians.
But that was the whole goal. And I'm excited.
Yeah.
And I know we've had a bunch of repeat musicians. Jane,
Yeah.
who couldn't be here today because she's in the process of putting together yet another amazing album, has been an amazing friend to this podcast. Really wonderful. And I'll tell you one thing I really want to do, Harris, which is I want to have a goodbye party in Nashville. So I will call everybody so that we can all get together and just have some fun because Jane and others need to meet each other. We've, especially because of the pandemic, there was a time when the plan here was the round table in my office. You'll remember this, with the big Yeti mic, and we were all going to talk and laugh and just have a little mini party about informatics topics. And then we had to go to Zoom. And it was a very different experience that I think we made work. And Ellie came along, moved us to Riverside and made it amazing. So
Yeah.
it's way better. And the video looks fantastic. I don't look anywhere near as stupid as I did on regular old Zoom.
Yeah, mentioning that, going back to the very beginning, it made me just think about my very first episode on this. And I mean, Kevin, I don't know if you remember, but the very first episode, I don't even know if it. Oh no, I do know that it didn't get published because someone forgot to hit record.
Me. Me.
Yeah, it was a
Oh, I didn't
great
know that.
episode. Yeah, it was Travis Osterman
Hmm.
and Darren Mize and Adam Wright
Yep.
and me.
Yep.
And was there somebody else? Wasn't there? No, no, no. That was an episode. That was the second episode. Yeah, and then, unfortunately, at the very end, after we all thought, like, wow, how pivotal, Kevin looks over and says, "Guys, I'm really sorry, and I'm really not joking, but I forgot it didn't record."
I didn't even know what to say because typically what we've done, it was still new to me to do it in the office I was in. And I wanted the computer to be off on the side so that it wasn't going to get knocked and everything else. And I was using the software package and I thought I had a system, but I didn't. And I looked over and I could see all the waveforms and it looked like it was doing the right thing, but what it wasn't was colored in the way that means it was recording. And I didn't notice that till the very end when I went to save it. And I couldn't get the save button to light up. And in my head, while we're talking and laughing and I'm looking, I'm thinking, don't even tell me that I never record for one of the best episodes I could ever imagine. Yeah, thanks, Harris, for bringing that up.
Yeah,
Appreciate
yeah.
it.
No, and Adam was in the second one that I was in. But I mean, let's go back. Kevin, be the historian. Tell us a little bit more. Bring up the highlights, the
I will.
highlight reel, if you will.
Highlight reel. So, for people who have never tried one of these, when you typically have an idea for a podcast, you spend somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 months getting equipment, talking to people, learning about the latest approaches, setting up your room to have minimal, noise interference. And I did all that. And by November, was working through a test version of it, which was called Naming My Baby. And then I proceeded to put together all of the speakers that we were planning to have in the first year. The thought was we would, basically go ahead and record most of those episodes by like March. And then it would just be post-production stuff and we would put them out once a month. So January was great. And then all of a sudden there was this thing called COVID. And right around the exact same time, we had been really excited about the work the CDC was doing to launch data modernization initiatives. And then all of a sudden, none of that work could have a follow-up because the pandemic hit and we were worried mostly about flattening the curve. And someone said to me, "Oh, so you're going to do a podcast episode about that, right?" And by that point, I was like 4 episodes in. So I thought, well, I guess we're going to have to just interrupt them. And then I realized we have to be careful when we record because if we say something that turns out to give away the fact that this is 4 months old, that's a different podcast. So it just totally changed the way I thought about it. Um, by May, we kind of figured out how we were dealing with things post-pandemic, and that was the time at which George Floyd was murdered by the police officers that caused this nationwide conversation about systemic racism and Black Lives Matter. So, of course, pivoted to cover how some of what might have happened during that period could have been improved by better use of informatics and ontologies. Um, and that was a good set of episodes. A year later, April 21, we started with 21st Century Cures, the first sort of anti-information blocking act that was really seminal. And we decided to have episodes about that. We covered that twice because we were really wondering about whether patient portals would literally impact people who had chronic illnesses in ways that were bad. And one of the reasons for that was because it was also in April that my husband got very, very sick. And while I was trying to get sleep, was getting bombarded by notification alerts about everything going on in the ICU. And it just about freaked me out. So I was like, okay, we got to have an episode on that one. So then, then we were doing okay. We're covering informatics, and Harris and I have all these great ideas. And then June of 22, the U.S. Supreme Court says, you know what? Let's overturn Roe v. Wade and eliminate the federal abortion rights, which also means, by the way, if you're in certain states, let's also make it very difficult for doctors and nurses and Planned Parenthood to function. And so we saw a really important informatic question there, which was, data and privacy in an era where there could be sort of federal attacks, that might come back again.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Just a little bit.
It's possible. I don't know when though. Yeah. And anyway, that was an episode that I think really went well. And then, of course, November was OpenAI's release of ChatGPT and launched us thinking a lot about AI and issues that related to that.
Yeah. And one thing that I think we didn't talk about is right before the pandemic hit, just a week or so before the pandemic hit, Nashville had a tornado.
Oh yeah.
And so
That's so
remember,
true.
yeah, one of our episodes we recorded and we were
Oh,
talking about like all the flooding and everything
yeah.
that had happened, years prior, and how like public health is so important to be able to capture public health data when we have natural disasters. And then like a week later we had another natural disaster, and then we had a pandemic. No big deal.
Was that the year that we also had the shooting around New Year's Eve? I mean, the explosion.
Yes, yes, that December was the year that we had the bombing in downtown, and Second Street areas or Second Avenue is still the same.
Yeah.
Still haven't rebuilt it.
Seriously.
Yeah,
Wow.
Everything else, there's like been a crane on every other block. That's interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's some plans, but it's still like a weird little area because they really didn't do a lot. They just cleaned it up essentially.
And you're bringing up a really good point because one of the things that was a hallmark of these early episodes was we were learning a lot about the ways informatics could do things different. And I'd forgotten that the tornado episode, we had some amazing guests. Scott, whose last name I cannot remember, he's a singer. We'll look it up. But Scott was on the episode. Um, he runs, is it Moo?
It's like moo.tv or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I love you and remember you and cannot remember your last name if you're listening. Figure it out. Anyway, one of the things that we talked about, yes, Moo TV. That's what it is, I think. Right. He was talking about the fact that he had diabetes and hadn't really had any healthy food for months and had gained weight. His A1C was high. And it was the first time we realized there's a role for predictive tools to help patients who are in high risk areas after storms recover their lives. To give them reminders about their meds. Remember this? And we were talking about, boy, if we could work with the Weather Channel to get predictions to people who had things like a pharmacy that was where their meds were that's no longer there so that they knew where to go to pick up their meds. We had some great ideas.
Yeah, yeah. Lori Novak was on that episode.
Yes, it
She talked a
was.
little bit about her experience as an anthropologist and how she's done some data collection around that. That was a really good episode. I
It
love that
really
one.
was. Really was.
Yeah.
And luckily we recorded that one.
Yeah, we recorded that one. That's when I knew I could be back. Also, I think that was the one where you tried to pay some penance and gave me some limoncello that was top notch.
Oh, yes, that's right. The requirement was going to be pre-pandemic that we had limoncello at every single one of our recordings. Harris had this wonderful idea, and I blew it by bringing COVID-19 into the place.
I know, I know.
Yeah.
Kevin, why'd you have to do that?
I wish I
Wait,
hadn't.
you did? You gave people COVID?
No.
Fake news, deep state. No, one of the other episodes I really enjoyed was where we talked a little bit about the use of patient portals and being able to utilize those on communications for like HIV testing and STIs. And between that one and the one with Trent and talking about the information blocking, I think just seeing how much healthcare has changed and being able to bring in patients to be a part of informatics has really, I mean, I think something we didn't expect to see so different in the 5 years that we've been doing this podcast.
That's right. No, I agree with you. So you know what's really clear, Harris, is that if you and I were asked to name our top five sort of topics, we would be going back and forth for hours. So luckily, Ellie took on the question and said, I will listen to them and I will tell you what it seems like the most well received topics were. So, Ellie, did you find out anything helpful?
So yes, I could kind of group most of our 37, 38 episodes into 5 categories for the most part. I will say like the runner up was episodes about being in informatics. So some of the episodes that I got to hop on were interviewing you, Kevin, or interviewing some of your colleagues that were a part of biomedical informatics departments. You also had episodes about women in healthcare in clinical settings
Yeah, we did.
episode. You
Yeah.
had episodes about your book, your children's book, and the process of making that with other people. So that's kind of the runner-up
You guys
category.
made me do that one. I was not going to do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Bradley got to be on that one. He loved that.
Oh
Yes. Oh
yeah.
my God, yeah. So you found 5 for us.
Yes. Okay.
And then I think you, if I'm not mistaken, you sent to a number of people who've been on these episodes some of your favorite segments, right?
So yes, I tried to call up some friends, call up some past guests, some I knew, some I didn't know. Yeah, people that had been on ideally multiple episodes so they could kind of talk about their experience recording over the years. And so yeah, I have 5 topics and we can go through them all together. Our top 5, it's what is it? Top 5 songs on Spotify, top 5 of informatics in the round.
I can
Oh,
only
there's
do
a
this.
dog now.
I can
Yay.
only do this drum roll thing for so much longer.
Oh, you're
Cameo.
doing the drum roll? I was going to ask for a drum roll. Okay. So we have first is kind of our introduction to informatics slash what is the electronic health record slash what is health information exchange? Why do we need informatics? Our second topic is going to be around patient trust and data privacy, just kind of all of those things about what patients expect to be done with their data. The third topic we have going on is public health informatics, but also zooming in on the COVID-19 pandemic, which took up so many talking points during the midst of our seasons. Our fourth is on health equity, which was also the theme of like our 2023 podcast season. And then finally, artificial intelligence, AI, chatbots, all of that good stuff that we tried to focus on in the last part of 2024. So those are kind of our guiding themes, our top 5.
Yeah, those are great. You did a great job because I have memories of every single one of those. And
Yeah.
you gave us clips to listen to, and we've listened to the clips. Harris, have you listened to the clips?
Of course.
Okay. So I think what the plan is now is we're going to go through with some guests, some of whom are from these episodes. I guess all of them are from these episodes, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So we're going to go through with them the topic again, just to see if they had anything that they remembered that they wanted to emphasize and maybe give us a little bit of an update. So for the rest of this episode, possibly split into 2 parts, kind of like a really good Harry Potter movie or say Wicked. We might have to like have 2 different episodes.
Yeah.
Like the old days.
Or not, because I'm still really angry about Wicked being in 2 parts. I didn't find that out until like right before I watched the movie.
I have to tell you, I didn't find it out until about 2 hours into the movie.
Oh.
I seriously didn't know. I was watching and I thought, boy, at this pace, we're going to be here all night unless they're doing 2 parts. Watched a little bit longer and I thought, no, they're building out too many details here. This is a 2-parter because I could like look at the clock. Anyway, about enough distraction. Okay, let's kick this off by listening to some excerpts because I think that'll be a great way for all of us to remind ourselves about some of the great work that our guests have put into teaching an audience. So we're going to start off with a clip from an episode that was from June of 2020, all about electronic health records and health information exchange. And also, we're going to talk then about 21st century cures and information that we had in a podcast from May of 2021. The speaker for the 21st century cures was Trent Rosenblum, and the speaker for the informatics and electronic health record topics was Nancy Lorenzi. And let's listen to that for a sec.
And here's the quote that I found that I thought was interesting. Knowledge is power if it is applied in a powerful way. So look, if I look at informatics and I look at all the cell phones that are out there, what can we do that is informatics oriented that we can take to the cell phone that would help either improve my life so that I could lose some weight or listen to my heart or do different, I've got an Apple Watch so I can do an EKG. So the question is, where's that powerful way? We can design a powerful tool or multiple tools, if none of us use it, it's useless.
I mentioned that we have a patient portal, and now really all health systems have patient portals. And what I heard is you'd love to have the information. You don't always understand it, but you'd love to have it. The research has shown fairly clearly that patients who are empowered with their health information do a much better job partnering with their providers and taking care of themselves. They do a much better job self-managing their disease, and they do a really good job working with whoever the caregivers they have in their life are, again, to manage their disease. You don't have to understand everything, and there are resources available to help you understand it. It might be your provider, it might be a friend or a caregiver. It might be Dr. Google, which actually has access to a lot of great resources. Not everything on Google is great, but there's a lot that you can access just by hopping online. And then most health systems like ours also offer well-curated educational materials. But this all starts not with a Beatles song, but it all starts with having access to that health information about you, your own health data.
Well, hello, Ya.
Hello, Dr. Johnson.
Everybody who's listening in. Our first guest today is one of my favorite people, Dr. Ya Kumar Crystal. Ya has been a personal friend and a professional colleague forever and ever and ever, it seems, and it's made my life happy. If you haven't ever seen Ya, please go over to YouTube and just see Ya's smile, which is infectious and so needed in 2025. That's all I'm saying about that.
I feel like the room just got brighter as soon as she popped in the recording. I was like, oh, I love her smile.
Yep.
Well, you guys are very, very, very generous. And I'm honored to be considered a colleague at this point because you've been a mentor of mine for a long time and one of the highest people I admire. So yay, glad to be here.
Are you saying hi because I'm using edibles to help me sleep?
Sometimes, these days you got to do what you can to get by.
Exactly.
Wait, so yeah, were you in the same place you are now, like back in 2019, 2020 when y'all started this, or where have you come in the last 5 years?
I have, and that's funny with regards to journey because I'm a lifer. I've been at Vanderbilt for a while now. I have to say I have looked many other places, but some of the things that always brought me back to Vanderbilt is the informatics presence, the endocrinology presence, and all the different schools and divisions that work closely in collaboration. So I'm honored to say that I'm still at Vanderbilt. I'm trying to collaborate to continue to do good work.
So yeah, when we talk about the episodes that were near and dear to your heart, I knew that the ones about electronic health records had to be. And I'm curious, we sent you a couple of clips. What did you think?
It's really amazing to go back and reflect on what the journey has been and what the changes have been since we last had the discussion. I think one of the most explosive things that you have to be sleeping under a rock to have missed it is the advent of LLMs and how they've been changing the way we're able to interact with the EHR and the new ways we can harness data and evaluate what the interactions between patients and providers are. It's been wild.
It has been. It's been, I think if we were to redo that episode right now, that's pretty much all we'd be talking about, right? So back in the day, we were talking about sort of the way that electronic health records and informatics orientation can improve the way we manage information. Do you think we've gotten better at that?
I think we're being more thoughtful about it. As you mentioned, with some of the changes we've seen with LLMs, I don't want to keep on bringing it back to that, but I think everyone's pausing and re-reflecting about, well, why are we doing things the way we're doing? I think people have for a long time had, electronic health records that are paradigms of the paper health records. But now that we have new ways of seeing information and how it can be retrieved, people are actually pausing to say, like, does this have to be the way it has to be? So things are evolving slowly but surely, and even our vendors that have done things the same way for a very long time are taking notice and saying, does it have to be the same way that we're capturing and showing information?
That's great. One of the things that you mentioned there, and I'm not afraid to shout out to Epic a little bit here, is Epic has been vilified for so long. And Cerner and others, Oracle now, if you will, are keeping up and doing some very interesting work. But Epic was not afraid, with their very large market share, to be first in this area. And they arguably didn't have to be, because we were stuck with Epic. We didn't have to. But one of the first things that they did was start pilot projects all around the country for exactly the reason you said, which is they recognized that this was an opportunity to get us out of these highly transactional systems and into the kind of stuff, that you've been demonstrating with Hey Epic, which, oh my God, you were like first on the scene for this.
The cool part is, like, I am not kidding when I say I've been waiting for this kind of moment, just since I've been in informatics, just seeing all the convergence of the technologies to actually have something that goes beyond a demonstration project and actually just works.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for my Siri and my Alexa to catch up, but we'll get there with them as well. Yes, Epic has been really fast thinking and not afraid to work collaboratively with organizations to do small tests of change and say, does this work? And let's go back to the drawing table. And I feel like we're actually co-building as opposed to having modules handed to us. We work directly with developers and have these large sessions with other organizations. And everybody's so excited. In the world of computer science, it's just a really exciting time to have kind of new tools, new candy every day. And there's something in the news about a new model being released. And everybody at Epic, if you've ever been on campus, they're young and they're just so full of life and energy and ambition to be in a position where they can kind of restructure the EHR.
Yep, I agree. I mean, and they're really experts at this technology because they've had a chance to grow up with it. In some ways, you could almost call them GPT natives.
I like that.
So, yeah. Eris, what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, when we think back to about 5 years ago, or even back when Vanderbilt went on to Epic, we were talking about having to train physicians on all these electronic health records. But now, like you just said, really a lot of these physicians are physician scientists who really like to dabble in the EHR and dabble into these tools. Do you see us going down that path where really it's a combination of someone who is more like a scientist on the informatics side as well as physician? Or do you see us maybe doing a turn back to where I don't really want things to be as much technologically?
I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle where technology ends up being more silent in the background because it works so well. The paradigm people always say is like, no one has to pay you to use your phone. You just do because it's useful and it does the things you need it to do. The problem we've had with archaic systems are that the layouts with the tabs and the, where the things are filed, it's someone else's mind map. They're like, well, it makes sense for this tab to be here. And this is how I think someone should walk through information finding. But you don't have to have it that way anymore with the tools as they exist right now. And the ways you can actually just directly inquire and get your answers back, the whole interface just changes. An interface is really just your way to converse with the EHR, but you can literally converse now. It's bananas.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I do think you're absolutely right. And the good news is everybody, including our vendors, seem to be supporting that change. So whatever happened, you think, with 21st Century Cures? I'm not here to talk about it, but in his episode, one of the most exciting parts of it was information blocking goes away. Patients now have access to the portals. Has that turned out to be as great as we all thought it was going to be?
I think so. And one of the most interesting things that's occurred as a result of some of the changes we have, the new tools, is the concept of an ambient scribe workflow, where you're in a room with a patient and you have this recording device that can capture the conversation and generate the note for you. So as we're starting to implement it here, when the patient comes in the room, you say, hey, I have this cool new device that's going to record our conversations to write a note. And I always say that you can see a copy of yourself on My Health at Vanderbilt. And they're like, what? That's interesting. So being able to point them to the benefit of this ambient scribe, it's not just writing a note for me, but you can see it yourself, has actually been a huge selling point. And I think patients are being able to see the artifacts of the conversations that we're having and see the real points of decisions that we make as a clinical conversation.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear it because I think certainly my experience as a patient has been that it's indispensable. And it's great to hear that that train has continued. It's left the station and it's hitting all the marks that we were hoping it would hit.
I was just going to say, I think what's really interesting about that is when we were talking about 21st century cures as it was rolling out, one of the big concerns for providers was this is going to change how I have to do notes because I might not be able to be as candid, or I might have to be more candid because they're going to read something and I need them to understand what my note actually means. So providers anticipated it was going to change how their note taking was going to occur, but I don't think to this level if you think about it, just a few years ago.
My documentation has changed a little bit here and there. The most notable thing for me is like in physical exam, I used to write obese because that's a medical term, but now I just write elevated BMI. And I think I'm a little just more thoughtful of just the terms that I use that can be misconstrued, not because I'm trying to be mean, but it's just a medical term we've always used, but really has negative connotations in the real world, in the vernacular. And with regards to patients now being able to see their note, I think it's a really good thing. We were providers and scientists on this side. And unfortunately, some of us have had the experience of having to be a patient or the friend of a loved one who's in the hospital. And knowing that you can actually peek over the fence and really understand what's going on is really reassuring.
I agree.
Yeah, I'll just add in that I just recently got access to my mom's My Chart stuff. She's got 4 different My Charts from the different doctors that she goes to, which is so much fun. But I noticed that one of her providers accidentally put that she had been a long-term smoker. She was not. She actually was just talking about she is around my grandfather's secondhand smoke. And so she actually went back and talked to her provider because she was like, your note is wrong. I'm not a former smoker. I've never smoked. And her doctor had been making decisions based on the information that she thought she had been a smoker. And so that was a really important piece of information she had to go back and correct and really helped improve her care with her doctor. So I thought it was so cool to see that like actually happening in real time for her.
And I'd like to say that we were the ones who helped the informatics community realize that. That would be false. But Dr. Jim Semino gave a talk not too long after our episode where he was pointing out that in one of the records at the University of Alabama, there was a patient whose record went from a patient who had type 2 diabetes to type 1 diabetes, and then that was carried forward from every other note. And he went back and did the forensics and found out exactly when it happened and how many other people had since just copied that forward, and at what point did it essentially completely erase the history of type 2. And all of that had happened. So yeah, I think this is a really great point, and maybe we are the ones who brought it up first. Who knows?
Right. I know that we keep talking about, or I've talked about, I know for a long time that the medical record is a billing system first and foremost. Do we think that it still is, or is it starting to make that transformation into something different?
Yeah, that's all on you.
Oh my goodness. The EHR wears so many hats. I think at the end of the day, it has to be able to capture the work done and has to be a showcase of the medical decision making, the complexity, so that the hospital can keep running. But I think the purpose that it serves also as a communication tool, just between providers, as a communication tool for yourself. I have to be honest that I document for myself because I'm like, I'm going to see this kid in 6 months. I need to know exactly what decisions I made because their labs are going to come back and be like, who was this person? And what was it that was different about their presentation than somebody else? And as someone who works in the research field, I actually document with researchers in mind thinking, well, I need to make sure I'm as precise or I'm making sure I'm capturing the right code because someone is going to be doing an analysis to say, what are the correlations between someone who's smoked and what this diagnosis is? And if their documentation for smoking status has been incorrect, that's going to throw off all of our assumptions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, you can tell why it was great to get Ya on here because she knows so much about this. And it's so much fun, Ya, to hear you talking. And thank you so much for everything you did to make this particular podcast a success.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having us, for giving this world this podcast. I would geek out and just want to go for walks and runs, have it playing and just get insights from people that are so smart and have been in the field for so long and just becoming a better person as a result of it.
So we'll just have to start listening for your new podcast that you're going to create now, right?
Yeah. Right.
Harris, we're on.
It's you and me, and our sons. We can do it. It'll be 50% Fortnite and 50% actual informatics.
I love it. You know what? There is something there. We have our little like
There is
avatars and.
Yep.
Here it goes.
All right. The next clip that we're going to play is from August of 2020, and you'll be hearing Brad Mallon. This was a fantastic episode about patient trust and data privacy with Ellen Wright Clayton and Brad. It was titled Data Privacy, Possible, Impossible, or Somewhere in Between.
All-star cast. Can't wait.
Oh, yeah. All right. Let's listen to it.
But it's interesting because you ended up with Congress setting the law, and then you have HHS setting these rules, and at times they're in conflict with one another, and mainly because they came out of two different groups. Policy and law is an interesting thing, right? It serves two purposes. On one side, it codifies the expectations and the beliefs of society, such that it says like these are the boundary conditions. And we all agree that these are the boundary conditions. And if you violate them, then we have the ability to ostracize and penalize you in whatever way we see fit. And then there's the flip side of it, which says that we also know that there are markets that govern society. And that if the markets have the ability to get out of whack, then we set policy and we set law to try to create some type of a level playing field or reorientation of the market to ensure that it doesn't exploit all of the individuals and the companies within society. And the unfortunate part, though, I think with HIPAA is that it meant well. The privacy rule meant well in that it really tried to say that there were rights that individuals had with respect to their data in terms of, you can request an accounting, you can get access to information. Unfortunately, I also think it created loopholes with respect to data specifically. And one of those was that they created this definition of de-identified information, which, to be honest with you, I think is one of the worst words ever created, because when you think about it, it's de-identified. It's 5 syllables, and that is just way too many to try to describe what is a principle by which we use to manage all of our health information. But basically what it says is that if you de-identify the information, then the individual to whom the data corresponds has no rights with respect to that information. And the organization that collected it can do whatever they want. And in particular, what's happened is that we've seen I don't know if it's become multi-billion, but it's definitely close to it in terms of a market for the sharing of data about health data about individuals. Now, there's questions about whether or not it's readily identifiable, and hopefully it's not. But it's not a market that should probably exist. And so this is a really strange situation, because now people, when they argue about privacy, sometimes they're talking about confidentiality. They're saying, I'm concerned that somebody's going to collect information without my permission. But then there's also this complication in that people believe that there's intellectual property, and they relate that to privacy, and that's information about me. And you're going to commercialize it and I get nothing out of it in return. That's a violation of my rights, and you violated my privacy in order to get that information. And this conflation of these two ideas, I think, becomes problematic. But the way that we've set up law in the United States, I think has created a situation where it's become difficult to tease these apart.
Well, here's a great guest. Welcome, Ellen Wright Clayton. How are you, Ellen?
I'm great, or as good as you can be.
I don't know what you mean by that. Could you clarify? No, please don't. Please don't. So life is good. Are you keeping busy? I hear data privacy and ethics are still a thing.
They're a very big thing, and they get bigger every day. So yes, I do not lack for work.
I figured. Are you still working very closely with Brad Malin?
We communicate every day.
Sure.
So I work very closely with Brad.
So given that, I know that Ellie has a question she wanted to start with, and I know she is pregnant with anticipation about the answer you're going to give. So please, Ellie, take over.
Yes, well, in the clip we just listened to, obviously Brad dropped a pretty hot take about where he stood with de-identified data, about whether a market for our personal data should exist, de-identified or not, RIP or not. So I was curious to see if you agreed with him.
Yes and no. I certainly think that HIPAA does not do what people think it does. It is full of exceptions. De-identification is not complete, particularly in the current environment. And what I think is also important is that HIPAA is actually very limited in its scope. It applies to healthcare institutions and their business associates, which means that data everywhere else is not covered by HIPAA. So things that are in 23andMe, Ancestry.com, in pharmaceutical companies, none of that is covered by HIPAA. So I think all those things are incredibly important to think about. And people ought to be concerned. Now, there have been some other ways to deal with some of the holes in HIPAA with other laws, particularly in the research context, the 21st Century Cures Act. And then a number of states are getting in the business of doing data privacy. That's going to be a mess because they're all different and they all do different things. And, you know, what we ought to have is a national policy, but we're not going to anytime soon, I don't think.
No.
But the other point that I do disagree with Brad about is the idea that people have intellectual property rights and data about them. And I say that because people talk a lot about their data or my data. And that sort of implies in common parlance that we have complete control over data about us. And that is emphatically not the case. Emphatically not the case. And so I, in my own talking, like to talk about data about them, data about me. And the idea of intellectual property, I think, is much more nuanced than just saying people have an intellectual property interest in how data about them are used. One case that got this spectacularly wrong was the Moore case many years ago, in which a man who had hairy cell leukemia, the doctors knew it was creating interferon. They didn't tell him it was creating interferon. They kept seeing him, taking more of his blood to develop a very valuable commercial product.
Wow.
That should have had intellectual property interests. But the idea that, for instance, data about me, you know, when combined with thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, that I somehow have some residual right to intellectual property? I don't think so. I mean, I think we have to have a debate about that, but it is not as simple as people saying, these are data about me and I am entitled to how they're used by somebody else to make money. I just don't think that makes sense. Ruth Faden, who is great, published an article more than 10 years ago in the Hastings Center report. And when she talks about the idea that some amount of data needs to be available to be used for research for the public good, she talks about it in the learning healthcare system. And I think we need to, I understand why people are hesitant about that, but I do think that that is something that we need to be talking about more seriously. So as I said, yes and no with Brad.
Well, I have to tell you, that is just absolutely fascinating on so many levels. And as is always the case, I can immediately think of at least 2 or 3 conversations we should have in the public about this. So, but let me just ask you a couple of things. So how do you feel about GDPR and the right to be forgotten?
Honestly, I think if you live in society, you have foregone your right to be forgotten entirely. I mean, that was actually the interesting issue in the very earliest case, article by Warren and Brandeis in 1898, I believe it was, in which the issue was rich people didn't like to have their picture taken. That's what this was about. The right to be let alone was the actual language. And I think it is hard to say that one can live in society, get the benefits of society, and also be forgotten. I think that it's hard to walk that line.
Wow. Well, I mean, I'm really glad you brought that up because I actually would not have guessed that was your stance, especially the work that we've done with genetics and genetic exceptionalism. I thought you might be a little bit more on the other side of it.
Well, what I do think is that this is another limitation of HIPAA and of our laws, is that once you fall out of HIPAA, once you fall out of the common rule, once you fall out of 20th century cures, there are no legal rules frequently, or the legal rules that exist don't work. And so what I have been advocating a lot is that people who use these data, investigators, have at least an ethical obligation, and I would hope soon, some kind of legal obligation to think about how they use the data, what the possible impact is going to be, so they are responsible for thinking about how data are used. So, do I think that it is ethically appropriate to take data from the electronic medical record, even if it's de-identified, or from a research data set and use it in some way to harm another person? Absolutely not. But our laws don't do that. Our ethics do. And our ethics say that we are responsible for how data are used. Now, I have to say that's not a particularly popular view, but I think if we want trust, and if we want to be able to do the research that can help all people, then then we have to treat people with respect.
Yeah. Ellen, I can almost imagine in the world of what we call agentic AI, where there are AI agents that use large language models or small language models to execute things, that what we probably need is an ethical AI in front of requests that says that is an inappropriate use of these data. No.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but in fact, I think that every step of the research process raises ethical questions. What is the question you want to ask? Do you have the right data? Do you have, and when I say right data, do you have all the variables that you need? Are you treating them, are you dealing with them respectfully? Are you, and this is one of the reasons I think it's important to engage with the public about research, because they have hypotheses about what's important and what's not. And they may be ones that I can't think of. And so thinking about how you frame your question, what do you need to know? What are the uses going to be? You have to think about downstream uses, and some of that investigators can't control, but some of them they can.
Yeah.
And they need to engage in, in public debate about what are good and bad uses of tools and data. Now, having said this is not unique to AI, not even thinking about being unique to AI. It just does it at a bigger level and with a level that makes us think that it's more personalized when it may not be.
That's really good. One of the things that I think we learned from what I've read about the All of Us project and the Native Americans' response to it was that there were questions they didn't want us to answer. So not only is it what does the community think we should be doing, but it sounds like you would also say, and what is it the community doesn't think we should be doing, which is a part of how that ethical framework should be established. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think that there are questions that we shouldn't be asking, and we have to figure out how that's going to be done, and that often will involve talking with the people who are going to be affected by the research results.
So, Ellen, if we were doing one more episode, which we're not, about the issues of law, ethics, and data, what's a topic that you feel is not getting enough attention that someone needs to be thinking about, other than fixing HIPAA?
Boy, that's a good question. In the current moment, we need to look at some of the issues that we're saying that we can't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We have to understand why we're being told that. We have to address the concerns that lead to those expressions. And we have to think about ways forward. And because ultimately all people deserve to have research done that will improve their health.
Right.
All people.
Right.
And that's what I would say.
Yeah, I feel like, as a science communicator, I feel like at least a part of what has gone wrong is that we have not figured out how to take a less erudite approach toward explaining why these topics are important. And, I just finished listening to Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point, which has an entire section about Harvard and why Harvard might have very specific sports teams, right? That was the women's rugby team that was the conversation. And even in that case, I wanted to call, if I could ever get his phone number. Malcolm, if you're listening, call me. My number is all over the internet. But I would really love to ask him a question about, do we need to unpack from Harvard's perspective why this might actually be good, as well as the reasons he came up with, which is why it's likely bad, in terms of the unequal ways in which admissions actually happen there. What are the good sides? Because I think we can imagine, as a Harvard student coming from Lily White, Connecticut, it might not be a bad thing that there's a women's rugby team that includes some Black people. I'm being really base about it because it's a podcast and we're allowed to get away with those things. But I think it would be useful to actually unpack that some. I remember I was a medical student visiting Caldwell, Kansas. I was the first Black person to ever be in Caldwell, Kansas. And it was still at the level where kids were coming up and touching my skin to see if it came off, right? And you know what I did? I invited all the kids over. I'm like, let's just get this out of the way. Come over, touch my skin, rub my hair. It's actually the way it is. My hair feels like yours. It's just curlier, and my skin is dark, and it's not coming off. And I'll get in the pool, and there will not be a brown streak, And by the time I was finished, there were a lot of adults who were actually, you could see, listening, trying to listen to the answers we were giving the kids because they were afraid to ask these questions. Therefore, their prejudice allowed them to make assumptions that were false. And I think your point is we've got to unpack why it is that there are these fears or these concerns. There's worry about the woke population. And then really, both as a Democratic Party, which some of us may be, but also just as humanity, appreciate how we are similar and how all of this actually might help us.
Well, I completely agree with you. And the other thing is that I think, I'm a lawyer, so words matter. And I think that we have to take the discourse back. And we have to take the discourse back in a way that is open to conversation.
Yes.
Rather than closing it down.
Yes. Well said. Preach, Dr. Clayton.
Yeah.
I'm teaching bioethics in the law school. I'm teaching health policy to the medical students. You better believe I preach.
All right. Our next clip is going to be near and dear to my heart, public health. Public health and COVID-19 pandemic with Melissa McFeeters. We're actually going to have a couple of clips here where we talk about COVID and the hidden data gap. From that one, you're going to hear Colin Walsh. And then the next one is Get Your Dose of Data, an introduction to public health. And I think, is this the one that I was talking about in the intro where I was saying how much I loved talking about the patient portal and public health?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, this is a good one. So we'll listen to that.
Yeah, it makes me think, gosh, we always worry about our own choices, but I feel has there ever been a time in recent memory where we've had to spend so much time worrying about other people's choices, which we don't have control over? And how much does other people's choices, you picture yourself walking down the street, and we all probably have played this game at some point. You kind of wonder about somebody's backstory. And if you're Sherlock Holmes, you can probably say what that is, but none of us are, right? Yeah. So now we're in a world where you go to the grocery store and you're not only playing that out in your head, but you're wondering what choices did this person make today that might put me at risk? And you can't find out. That's hard. It makes me think, gosh, not only do we not capture these data, we're not even asking the questions the right way. When's the last time you felt unsafe? What do you do that brings you joy today? we don't ask those questions. And that might be more important than any of the, the diagnostic codes we've got for those people around them. And certainly in the longer term things we're talking about, I think we have to start thinking that way. I mean, systems that are more compassionate in that way, and ask people questions that are actually important to them, as opposed to those questions that are important to us.
I'm going to go back in time, 20 years. Syndromic surveillance, I think, is a great example of how colloquial terms are important and how informatics can be the tool to normalize those terms across a federated ecosystem, so that when somebody in the Carolinas fell out, in the Pacific Northwest, we know that means they fainted. And those terms used in chief complaints in emergency room departments have to map to the same thing in order for our national perspectives to work and give a view of what's happening all over the country. An epidemiologist who's practiced their whole life in Seattle is not going to understand terms used in the South to describe a fainting spell. So there has to be that localization, that expertise, that translation to understand, well, this means that, and do that mapping and bring it together into the right definition.
Welcome, Melissa McFeeters. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm especially doing well because I get to see you this afternoon, talk about things I love to talk about.
Thank you. I was so excited that we were able to get you on here because, obviously, as you know, we're doing these sort of highlights of the last 5 years, and public health informatics and the things that you've been thinking about, which are, by the way, so much broader than that, have been integrated within many of our episodes. But we're still putting you to the task of answering a couple of questions related to public health informatics and public health in general. Is that okay?
Happy to do it.
All right. So my question for you, listening to the excerpts everybody else just heard, was we went through this pandemic and there is this field called public health informatics. How do you think public health informatics has been impacted by what happened during the pandemic?
Oh my goodness, in so many ways. First of all, I think that public health informatics was kind of a little bit of a secret before the pandemic. And then we figured out that actually what public health had known and what public health informaticians had known is that interoperability, connecting data, moving data, figuring out how it all fit together is absolutely the basis of good public health, and certainly of emergency public health in the context of a pandemic. So that's been enormous for the field. I think this whole concept of data modernization came out of that, this idea that we have to modernize our systems, and that actually public health isn't just, shoe leather public health on foot, but it's actually very highly technical, and we need it to connect in lots of different ways.
So do you think that the Bloomberg site helped to reinvent some aspects of public health, or at least bring more awareness to, the dashboard that everybody was watching every single day? Do you think that was an exemplar of the future? Do you think that's a vestige of the past? What do you think that is?
That's a really good question, because that site was sort of created by pulling off of all the individual public health sites. It wasn't like a data flow in the way that we would have wanted it to do. And yet it showed us what could be possible and should be possible, that we should be able to track data from day to day to day and know what was going on in a particular situation.
So that was a federated site. All the data was from different locations brought together and merged and harmonized.
Right. Exactly. And kudos to the folks who did it on their own and figured out how to do that, because it wasn't really a part of our public health infrastructure. So I think what it did was it highlighted the importance, and it highlighted the appetite that people had for the data.
Yeah.
In a big way. And I do think that galvanized public health as well, to say, oh, you know what, this is what we need to do. So if you listen to Mandy Cohen, who was most recently our CDC director, that's one of the things that she kept saying, is that we have to get data out to the people and we have to get it out faster.
Yeah. Melissa, when the other thing I really got a lot out of from the pandemic was the relationship with Google and public health. And the fact that you could literally, like Rob and I were getting a little stir crazy, and we would say, let's go to Hilton Head. And then along with that conversation, we would bring up the overlay on Google Maps to see what's the transmission rate that we're going to run into. And that actually informed our decisions about places not to go. If we were in reasonably good shape where we were, and we were about to enter a hotbed of Delta variant, then we or Omicron, I guess. Delta was first.
Delta was first.
Right.
Omicron
Yeah, it was Delta.
I blocked it out.
Yeah, I kind of noted it too.
Well, and you should be able to do that, right? So the idea of public health data as sort of the same concept as like weather data, right? You know that there's a hurricane coming, you're not going to go to that particular location. Now, we in public health and public health informatics want people to be able to make those choices with that knowledge and information so that they're emboldened to make healthy choices for them and their families.
Yeah, I think that, I hope that there is a literature that is emerging about this and calls for what, a redeveloped version of public health in this country could look like. One of the points that Bryant has made many times, as have the group of people thinking about health information exchange, is that it really shouldn't be this sort of trench warfare at the state level, especially when so many people live near borders and therefore are kind of, susceptible to two completely different sets of policies around how their public health is managed.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, and I'm going to add one more layer to that, which is it's not just sort of state to state or across state, but it's the border, the unseen border, so to speak, between healthcare and public health. Because at the end of the day, much, if not most of the data that public health is using actually comes out of other sources. It comes out of healthcare, or it comes out of our wastewater systems, or it comes out of other or pharmacies or whatever. And we have to connect it. So people talk about public health data, but they don't entirely understand how much of it has to interoperate and come from all these other places. And that sometimes is the hardest piece.
So important. Thank you for clarifying that. Ellie, I heard you had a question too.
Yeah, I think you talked about it a little bit earlier, just the holes in the infrastructure that we ran into during COVID, and we had to course correct like in an emergency situation, which, is never going to do the job it should have done in the first place. But I am curious in what ways we bounce back from a pandemic, and the time we're in, I've picked up the habit of my age group to catastrophize and see the next pandemic around the corner, especially as it interrupted such a pivotal stage in my life and my young adulthood. What do you think was not a benefit, but what good came out of the pandemic in terms of public health infrastructure?
It's a great question. So I will say two things. One, I will say in public health, we didn't discover the holes. We knew they were there. And in fact, there were people from in public health who had been going to Congress for years. So if you look back to CSTE's work and the public health highway that they wanted to create, people were saying, help us. We have got to shore up this infrastructure. And the pandemic made it all that much clearer to everyone.
I told you so moment.
Right? Well, we try, public health, we try to be really nice. But it made it very clear to many, many people, and not just the people who were in the trenches going, please help us. The other thing that came out of it that I think is really positive, and I will say tons of funding is going toward this work. The community is working hard to shore up that infrastructure, and I have a lot of faith in that. The other thing that came out of it that for me personally, I thought was a positive was, I just mentioned data coming from healthcare, was the recognition in the non-public health practicing community in healthcare and other parts of the economy that we're all in this together. And that we have to figure out a way to work together to address the next pandemic. And, it might not be just right around the corner, but it very well could be. So I think that sense of everyone's data is important, and we're all in this together, and we have to figure out how to talk to each other and come to the table together. was really the positive for me.
I know we've got to go. I'm going to ask one more question. I want to stay in the hopeful space.
Yeah.
Do you think we are more ready for the next pandemic than we were, based on everything that you've seen? Please tell me there's hope.
Not so sure. Let me say this. There are people who are ready. There are better systems that are in the process of being implemented and deployed. We can be ready if we really put our minds to it. We have to take it seriously and not have the memory lapse that tends to happen in public health. We pay a lot of attention in the middle of the emergency, and then we don't pay attention because public health is sort of what happens when you're just going through your daily life. So I think that is yet to be seen.
Well, I'm going to be hopeful that, we learned a little bit from the federated data and how bringing that together can help. We learned a lot from the ways in which we could do public-private partnerships to give people more access. Maybe we'll go back to the days of understanding the importance of surveillance, the snow part of this, which is, how do we keep bird flu at bay? Well, it would be nice if we could start by testing to see how much of it is actually in the community, for example. So I think we are all starting to be able to at least speak the language, and maybe that gives us a cause for hope.
I agree.
Thank you.
I'll stay positive with you. You've always been such a positive person in my life.
Well, thanks.
You keep me positive.
I have my days. Let's just put it that way. And in particular, 2025 has not been my most positive first month.
It's been a little rough.
It has been rough. All right.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yep. So anyway, it was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. And thank you so much for spending a little bit of time today, kind of rehashing it. And I hope I get a chance to listen to you on some other podcasts because it won't be mine.
Then that does make me sad. This has
been
so wonderful. This has been such a wonderful journey, Kevin, to see this and to bring informatics to lots of different people who didn't know what it was before, and now they do, and it's accessible. It's just been really a joy to listen along and hear all these great episodes.
Okay, so continuing on, one of the topics that was incredibly important, as we talked about earlier, was that we spent a lot of time in November talking about health equity. So we were really lucky in episode 29 to have Consuelo Wilkins and Stephanie Johnson Monroe talk about clinical trials. Are we whitewashing the data? Really good episode, got really interesting points of view online because they represented very different groups. And let's listen to that for a sec.
I'll chime in and say I completely agree that, access is an issue, especially if we're talking about access via the health system. But I would push it, push the challenges, up a few levels. So even before we talk about access to a trial, the studies aren't even designed with knowledge and expectations around equity or addressing disparities. So we've known for a very long time that Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latina populations are at higher risk, more likely to get Alzheimer's disease, have worse outcomes, get diagnosed later. I mean, there's so many disparities. So the populations who bear the greatest burden of the disease should be front and center when we're designing studies to understand, prevent, and treat the disease. So the studies need to be designed with that in mind. And so we shouldn't be just reliant on, access to care when it's time to think about those. So now it'll still be challenging even when we design it in the right way. But if it's not designed, considering, as Stephanie mentioned, ABCA 7 isn't written into the protocols. We're only assessing ApoE. And so again, we have a flawed study design that's really not intended to be answering questions broadly.
Well, Consuelo Wilkins is in the house. And by the way, Consuelo, I have to say, you look fabulous.
Thank you. So do you.
Well, thank you. I'm trying. Those GLP-1s are amazing.
Oh, well, I haven't had any, but I've heard that they are great. I'm benefiting from having an empty nest and not cooking for teenage boys.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, that's very true. The funny thing is when my daughter comes back to see us, she's like, "Can I make mac and cheese? Can I make, every possible fat, creamy pasta dish there is?" I'm like, "Yes, you can make it." And then I have to try to do it.
That's so horrible that she would
I
offer
know.
those things to
I
you.
know, isn't it? Isn't it? Well, thank you so much. Ellie and I were very excited. I think I have to say it's a little bittersweet because of things that are going on. But we had a chance to listen to a lot of our older episodes. And among the episodes, there were five that we thought were really impactful. And yours and Stephanie's was phenomenal. The fact that you guys really dug into the issues of equity in clinical trials, and I love that the title just emerged from that episode. Are we whitewashing the data? Which was just great on so many levels. Um, I'm curious though, given 2 years have passed, just about a little year and a half, what would you say differently now to your 2023 November podcast audience or self?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm so glad that our episode resonated. And being with Stephanie is always great. So she's an amazing thinker. But looking back, I would say, we need to do a better job of communicating
Yeah.
about all of those complex issues that we talked about. So, we tried to point out, why it's important to have populations who are most impacted by conditions be included in studies. And I think that's true now more than ever, as we're starting to see even more people try to think about this as rhetoric or somehow being politically correct. No, it's good science. Like you have to be committed to the ideals and principles of good science and good discovery. And I think we're just still not doing a great job of communicating that because people are so callous in dismissing it still that we
Mhm.
need people from marginalized groups, people who are experiencing racial and ethnic inequities, poor, worse outcomes. Like those are the populations that we must have in studies, and it's not because somehow they need more favoritism or they need to be thought of differently, but that is what the science should be reflecting, the people who have the greatest burden of the disease. And so I think that's better communication, focusing more on that and not just presuming that people understand some of what may be more nuanced there.
Yeah, that's really beautifully stated. And what's, of course, the irony here? We've spent so much time, and you and I've talked about how do we help to get the data to be better suited for things like AI, for clinical trials that are more relevant. And we never really thought we'd be at a place where we as scientists have to justify to scientists why that kind of work is important. So,
Great.
so here we are. It's now the beginning of 2025, and we're confronted with orders, executive orders, that frankly challenge some of what are our long held beliefs as a community, probably not the whole population. And that's the issue you're bringing up about communication. So given our current reality, what do we do?
Yeah, and I guess I will say that one of the challenges with the executive orders is that they are so broad, and that's a part of the communications challenge as well. So, if you listen, to some of the follow up conversations and speeches and responses and press conferences, it's clear that those, at least to me, it seems clearer, what those are focused on, and that they're not necessarily talking about science in terms of what is good science or challenging what is good science,
Right.
but it's talking more about discrimination and making sure that people have fair opportunities, which is exactly what we're talking about most of the time with equity. And so it's not that those general principles are not aligned. It's just the how people are interpreting them are different. And so I do think that moving forward, we have we have to find more opportunities to come to the table to see what we have that's in common. Like the polarization right now, I think has everybody thinking that there's no common ground and there's no opportunity to see a path forward. But I in a time like this, I reflect on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. And right now we're in the midst of chaos. And I think we have to find a way to get to the community piece.
Yeah.
And again, find those shared and common goals and areas where we do actually have more things in common. Um, Thinking about the polarization, it just seems so chaotic. But I do think that there are those opportunities. But going back to the first point, where's the communication? We really have to do a better job of communicating and hearing all the different concerns.
Right. Right.
Because the more we sort of dig into where we stand, we're not moving forward.
Right. And the we, it sounds like, is not just, the high and mighty ivory tower clinicians, scholars, but also the community and the context in which the community has learned about us, which I think maybe one of the clarion calls from this last election was, are we as in touch as we thought we were?
Right. Yes.
So
And
maybe
yeah,
you
no,
always
we
tell
could
me
go
that.
down many many holes if we wanted to talk about where we went wrong or what we thought we knew and we don't actually know.
Right. Right. So my big question is, you're so eloquent in this area, and you're, in addition to everything else that you do, and you've been a passionate speaker and researcher. What's next for you in terms of this? Are you going to do podcasting? Are you going to write some books? How are you going to communicate better what you've learned?
Well, I do think that what I'm going to do for myself isn't at the top of mind right now. I've been thinking in this current space of how I support the people, the teams, the folks that I've had the pleasure of working with for a long time in these different areas. So, what do they need to thrive in this current environment and setting has been at the forefront for me. So, um, I I'll think about myself at some point. You all are making podcasts look easy, but it doesn't seem like they're going to be they're that easy. I mean, I'm imagining all the things behind the scenes. So that sounds like I would just rather drop in on your next one and say things and leave. So
Well, on a serious note here, let me just say, I think you've known me well enough to know that these aren't things I've typically done for me. In fact, I started them at a point in my career where arguably there was no benefit to be had except just fun to do it and meet with people. And one of the most encouraging aspects of having this podcast has been the comments that I've received either in person or through email about how it's galvanized other people to do things.
mm,
So I would challenge you a little bit and say that a really important part of your present and future, as well as the past, is that you in some ways would be giving back to the community by reminding them about what you're reading and how you're putting it all together. The fabric that you're weaving from your knowledge and your leadership position is a voice I don't think this community has. So I would personally encourage you to use Substack or use a podcast and just spend a little bit of time talking, because people really need that right now. They need to know. I would venture to say that the people at Vanderbilt will be, the people who you serve will be listening to every word you had to say on a podcast and really appreciating it, knowing you.
it was so like you, Kevin, to give me work.
Did I do that?
Oh, always, Ellie. This is on point for Dr. Johnson to come up with more things for me to do. But no, I do appreciate it, Kevin, and I recognize that there continues to be a need for voices and for people to have a reason to come together.
That was great. The fifth and final set of excerpts are on by far the most recent and important topic, arguably the topic that's as important as the internet and the birth of mobile technology, which is artificial intelligence. We actually talked just a little bit about this in an episode called AI in Medicine, The Slippery Slope to an Uncertain Future. That was from February of 2020. And speakers were Michael Matheny and Tom Lasko, and you'll hear them talk just a little bit about deep learning. Our final clip is from a really terrific episode about chatbots in healthcare, the ultimate Turing test. We actually recorded this in August of 24. This particular clip stars Lyle Unger, who's a professor of computer science here at Penn, and Dr. Angela Bradbury, who is focusing a lot on genetics of cancer and has been developing chatbots. So we'll hear a lot about that from her in the episode, and here's a clip of it.
I think in an information state where you sort of approach complete understanding and complete data collection, complete information, you would have a tool that would be operable on everyone. I think, mammogram is an excellent example where, young patients are different than older patients. There's different sort of characteristics of their breasts. Certain racial and ethnic groups have different profiles, have different norms. If the data that the mammogram is using to build its systems isn't representative of the group that it's being used on, then you're at high risk for problems.
Exactly. I would have thought the same thing.
Yeah. And it's not just those issues that are the problem. It's things like if the mammogram was set up slightly off, or if it's a little bit out of focus, or if there's a little bit more noise on the sensor, there was some little issue. Those are problems that don't affect human radiologists when they read a mammogram. But a lot of these AI solutions to reading stuff like mammograms or retinal images or whatever, those are much more strongly affected by these little perturbations of things because they're not in the data set. They're unexpected.
Giving useful the right answer. Now it's not just that bots are passing the Turing test in the sense you can't tell if they're human. They write more convincing messages than humans do. They're more accurate given the same information. Many doctors have access to information the bots don't have, so the doctors are still better. But given the same information, they certainly write more empathetic statements than the average doctor, which is arguably a low bar. But doctors don't have that much time. The bots are very fast. There was a great, Jeff Hancock at Stanford did a great example. He had GPT, even 3.5, an old crappy one, generate 50 public health messages of why you should get vaccinated. Picked the top 10. A bunch of them were pretty crappy back then. Compared them against the 10 the CDC used, which is arguably also a low bar. And the ones that he had picked were more convincing than the actual get vaccinated messages being used by our Centers for Disease Control. So these bots are not just passing for humans. You can generate images of faces that are more trustworthy than real photographs of people. They're rapidly becoming just slightly superhuman at almost everything, as long as it's a small piece. You get a big complicated case, I'm going to go to my doctor still.
Right. When I always laugh because I say in clinic, humans can fatigue, right? The bot keeps on going with those empathetic statements. And when you're in clinic and you're 8 patients in and you're exhausted and you haven't had your coffee, like humans don't always perform the best either. So I think there are some merits there as well.
And there's a really super interesting question. People often, even though the bots give more empathetic statements than the doctors, people would rather have a slightly less nicely written thing from a real person than from a better written piece from a bot. And people get really pissed if you deceive them, if you pretend. Even things where we had a bot that was teaching recitation sections for class, and we initially framed it, I am Angela Duckworth, the bot. And it was clear it was a bot, it was not deception.
Yeah.
And the student said, no, you're a bot. Don't say you're Angela Duckworth. Say you're the bot representing her or whatever. But people did not like being told this bot's a human. when it's not. So I think there's a still open question of where the human touch comes in.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. One of my favorite people in computer science, Chris Callison-Birch, is in the house. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on this final episode, and congrats on making it this far and producing such an awesome show.
Yeah, I had no gray hair when we started. Not true, but they'll have to. We didn't have any video back then, so they'll never know. So, Chris, obviously, this has been an amazing 2024 for you, and we had a chance to hear a great episode in August, but a lot's even happened since August. So, we have a couple of questions I want to ask you, but I thought it would be interesting to say, first of all, what did you think about the episodes you heard?
They're really fabulous. So, one of the things that I really admire about the podcast is giving a venue that we can have these interesting conversations about the exciting trends in AI and seeing about its potential implications. I think everyone has this sense like, hey, AI is this transformative thing and it's going to change our work and how we communicate and all these aspects of life. And I really appreciate your hosting this as a venue for having those discussions in a way that are informed and deep, without getting too caught up in the hype and without like doing a panicked sell off of all our NVIDIA stock.
Only occasionally, but certainly not. So, Ellie, I know you had a chance to really think about this first episode that Chris heard. Where were you? What questions did you have for him?
Yeah, so I think one of the funny things, the fact, I wasn't around when they filmed this first AI episode, which was back in February of 2020. But even our episode that we filmed just a few months ago together, like, there's so much conjecture because we're like, we have this exciting thing and we're working with it, but we don't really know where it's going to go. And so I was curious, like, what did you think of the conjectures of the 2019 episode? Like, what would you go back in time and tell them? Like, you wouldn't believe this happened, or this fear of ours did come true or didn't come true. Like, I'm curious if our present could speak to the past right now.
Yeah, so I think actually the in the clip that you sent, the panelists actually uncovered a problem that is a hugely significant one. So, using AI that's trained on some data that you gather from a particular source. So, thinking about mammograms and the particular machine that's being used, or the demographic distribution of patients at the hospital, whether they tend to skew younger or older, or whether they have different racial distributions, being something that can cause or could cause AI to be led astray. So AI could pick up on signals in that data that were unrelated to the underlying thing that you actually wanted it to learn about, and therefore could cause it to overfit this particular set of data that you have, and therefore fail to generalize when you moved to a different type of machine or a different hospital or a different set of patients with different demographics than the one that you trained on. So I feel like that was actually an incredibly important question that continues to be a very important one. In fact, uh, one of the papers that I'm most excited by, that I'm involved with, was a paper from NeurIPS in December of 2024, where we looked at exactly this problem and how we could potentially address it for radiological images. So this is a paper that was led by another faculty member here, who I want to make sure I give total credit to. That's a younger professor, an assistant professor at Penn named Mark Yatskar.
Yeah.
So we have a co-supervised student, and he had this fabulous paper called "A Textbook Remedy for Domain Shifts," which is exactly what we're talking about in that clip, knowledge priors for medical analysis. And he had this really clever methodology for being able to use information in authoritative medical sources that's written in language in order to help a computer vision algorithm do better. So it showed that you could eliminate much of this fall off in accuracy as you moved from one patient population to another, or from other types of things that we would call spurious cues in the underlying radiological images.
Yeah, Mark sent me that paper, and I have to say it was brilliant. And there has been certainly in the last 2 years, many people scrutinizing, using SHAP equivalents to find where in the image are the features that are distinguishing, and often they're nowhere near the organs, right? It's where the tubing is outside of the shoulder, which would suggest that it's a certain type of a location, in which case the where the film is being created. So it is a really important area, and I think that's a fantastic technique. So I hope that really gets us further along than it already are.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think it shows part of the promise of the AI as we're building these larger and larger generative models and moving from LLMs to systems that combine both language and vision, and that can go beyond the LLMs, the initial versions of LLMs that were just producing sequences of words, to ones that mimic a little bit of a reasoning process. So I think all those trends are incredibly exciting and show that there is potential for growth in this area and that systems might continue to get better.
No, I agree. And I think that's a really key point. I should mention that Tom Lasko, who was in that episode, used to work at Google DeepMind. So he's around that space and had spent a lot of time when I first met him trying to convince us that deep learning was going to be so much more important than anything else that had happened in AI, and had these brilliant strategies for trying to deal with the noise in healthcare data by converting the actual data that were numeric into an image, and then using the image classification approaches to identify trends in the numbers, which worked.
Wow.
I was watching him thinking, how do you come up with this stuff? It's incredible.
That's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the deep learning revolution and deep neural networks has been a long build to the point where we are now. And I think 15 years ago, I was skeptical of it, but it's definitely proven that it's got an incredible amount of power. And the scaling of these models to larger and larger neural networks and more training data has just been like one of the most amazing engineering feats of computer science. And also the emergent capabilities that come alongside those are really just stunning. I mean, they're mind-boggling that the things that when you have at small scale do adequately become these really amazing, competent things at much larger scales is really impressive.
So that's a great segue into the question I had about this. So having had a chance to listen carefully to the August 24 episode that I was supposed to be attending, but managed to be stuck at home, still can't quite get over that. What's fascinating is how much has happened even in the chatbot space since then. And, obviously one of the biggest concerns we have is hallucinations, but another is compute, and people are getting more onto this whole, why do we need a chatbot? There are major climate implications. Along comes DeepSeek, that maybe, there's now emerging literature quickly about where it has flaws, but it does sort of point out that the technology is going to evolve pretty quickly. I have been just floored with the audio in, audio out capabilities of GPT now, near real time and just phenomenal. So tell me how you're feeling now about chatbots and their future in medicine, as our best skeptics.
I mean, I continue to be very excited by them. So, I think one of the trends since the last time I was on the podcast that I find really exciting is one that's actually reflected in DeepSeek. So, DeepSeek and OpenAI's O1 and O3 models represent something that's branded as reasoning models. I don't want to get into the underlying philosophy of whether a machine can be a reasoning system, or what would an actual logic-based reasoning system have to have in order to be truly reasoning. But I think yeah, but the general idea is, as I mentioned earlier, we scale these models to be larger and larger, meaning that training data increases, the amount of compute used for the training increases, the number of parameters increase, and alongside those you have increases ability and the performance of the models. Another really exciting place that's become a recent trend in how to scale the models is as they're producing the text itself.
Right.
So the very first OpenAI chatbots were really just glorified autocomplete where they're predicting one word at a time, updating what their context is, and then predicting the next word. That's called auto-regressive sampling. And DeepSeek's R3 and OpenAI's O1 and O3 models, and the brand new one that they released today called Deep Research, instead of instantaneously generating an output that you see being produced word by word, the models spend some amount of time, and that's the thing that can be scaled up or scaled down, speaking aloud to themselves and sort of reasoning through and thinking about the problem, formulating a strategy on how they might answer it. Sometimes even going out and trying to find sources of information to further investigate using this new trend in agentive AI agents that can operate by looking up information on the web. And so those models, I think, are incredibly impressive. Like the outputs are really, really good. And I think it expands the set of tasks that we might be able to delegate to AI.
With I think high trust.
Yeah. So trust, I think, is still an incredibly core thing that we're having to navigate in the AI space. I feel like trust is partly built by experience, but there's also elements of over trust that are likely still going to be a problem. So yeah, trust, I think, is still a core research challenge for everyone in the AI space.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, have you had a chance to see the screening of The Thinking Game, this movie?
No, I haven't.
So Demis, Hassabis is in there, and one of my favorite scenes in the movie is they are in the Google DeepMind space in what I guess they call the garden or the atrium, and one of the scientists is walking around showing the technology through her phone the room, and they go up to a painting, and she says, "Do you know what this is?" And it answers, of course, perfectly what it is. And then she says, "So where do you think I am?" And it says, "Well, you have to be at the Louvre because that's where the painting would be." And then she says, and this is the part, Chris, where I just thought, wow, where we are right now is really an amazing place. She goes, are you sure about that? Like, is there any other alternative? So it pauses, and it pauses for a while, right? And it goes, this is a fake because the walls appear to be cubicles. You are likely, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. Yeah.
It's really spectacular.
Yep. Right. So Chris, any parting words that you want to make sure you say both about, for listeners about where we are with AI, by the way, where they should go, where are you going to be spending a lot of time podcasting? Because I know you also do it. So anything you'd like to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so I'm teaching a brand new class here at Penn. Since the last time we chatted, we've launched our new undergraduate major in AI. And I'm also the faculty director of our online AI Masters of Engineering for Penn Engineering Online. And so I've been thinking a lot about like how to present this to people who are coming to the field new and wanting to learn about it. And so one of the very first lectures that I give to the undergrads is like understanding the general technology hype cycle, because I think that's going to be a core thing to keep in mind as we go through this period of AI. Like we are breathlessly excited about AI, which I think a lot of that is deserved, but I think we'll go through an up and a down period. So just like when DeepSeek got released and investors got scared that their $1 billion investments weren't giving them the moats that they thought they were, and then the Nvidia stock took a nosedive because maybe you could build it not on the latest and greatest chips. There'll be rocky moments like that where people lose faith or they recalibrate their expectations to be better aligned with the reality of what AI is and what it will be. But I think it's important to keep in mind that it's going to continue to improve, and the AI that we've seen so far and at the moment is likely to be the worst AI that we'll ever have. And so we're going to be on an upward trajectory. And even if that's an incremental trajectory, I think it's still going to have a really amazing impact on everyone's life and in the healthcare sector. So, strap in. Don't believe all of the hype, but keep in mind that this is going to be technology that over the next decade is going to find its place in a way that will eventually, along that AI hype cycle or that technology hype cycle, will find the plateau of usability and where it actually fits in with our lives and how it could affect us on a day-to-day basis.
I know that you're going to probably cover how much AI is already in people's lives, but they don't even realize it. Because I think, when I've had that conversation with people, I drive a Tesla, so I see a lot of it. But people, I think, don't even realize how much most cars use some degree of machine learning in some way. And they probably don't even realize how much of that technology is in their phones. Or, I think in some ways, having an introduction that helps them realize this isn't quite as foreign as you may think, which it sounds like is what you're going to do, is really great.
Yeah. It's exciting times.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Okay, well, that was fun. I have to say, we weren't sure how this was going to play out, having all of these different guests, but I thought it was pretty interesting to have a chance to ask people both what did they think of the clips, but also how did they think things have changed. And I was pretty enlightened by a lot of it. And by the way, started getting a little depressed that we'd made this decision to stop having the podcast, because now it's like, we had like 9 new topics.
Right. Last night, I think I texted you. One of the things that we really didn't cover was the GLP-1 craze and how much, Ozempic and all those drugs have taken over, not just like weight loss, but all these other health issues that people really didn't think that medication would cover.
Yep, it's true. I have to say, the topic I would want to give to that is how much don't we know about science?
Yeah.
Because there's so many things where, people can be led to believe we know this whole, kind of Fauci kind of hinted at this about the fact that Americans don't really appreciate that science is an evolving issue and that time matters and all of that. But I always talk about the Dolly the sheep experiments and how little we really know about reproductive biology. It was just knowing enough that made that work. And I think you're right about that from the standpoint of everything we really do. And GLP-1s, absolutely, of course, in retrospect, the people who I know who were part of that initial set of breakthroughs never expected that we would see the things that we knew biologically could happen, like the cardiovascular side, improvements.
Yeah.
But there were hints. Metformin was always kind of called the fountain of youth drug because it appeared to be something that reversed some aspects of aging of DNA. So I think there's more to all of this than we know. And that's the case with everything we do. And frankly, I think in this podcast, one of the things that we've learned is people said, why aren't you and Harris coming up with like the paper that's going to be discussed for the entire hour? And, I think our approach to this has been way better, which is to say, these are experts. We can do fact checking if we need to, but we can also talk about things that our kitchen table would actually care about. And we saw in the last, set of 5 people that they could just riff with us about topics that were tangentially related to the thing that they heard.
Yeah. I think, Ellie, you mentioned, what are things that have changed for us in these 5 years? And for me, just a few things. Life is very much the same for me. No, I decided to go pursue my PhD in
By
genetics.
the way, I should tell everybody she's lying because she's not a she, even though I keep
Right.
screwing it up. Harris is a guy, a dude.
Right.
I gotta stop that.
I got enough scruff.
Sarcasm.
Yeah. I got enough scruff now that I have to shave every other day on the face.
Really?
I was, I thought if I had continued to live life as a woman, that would still happen, but I thought it would be, my 50s. Just by my family's genetics. And with that, I decided to go for my PhD in genetics and I'm pursuing that, but that field has really taught me how little we really do know. We knew that the whole genome had been sequenced. We knew about chromosomes and the human race, and we thought we knew things about neuroscience and genetics and biology, but we're learning so much more. And I think if we had just stuck to one paper and really talked about the nitty-gritty of paper, we would have only been talking to people who already know these things and want to argue them and discuss them in the salons of science. This was really your brainchild of how can we take these very detailed topics into places that they don't normally get to go into at the kitchen table, where everyone should be able to hear about these things in terms that they understand.
I agree.
No, I was just going to say I appreciated that it was understandable because especially everyone knows someone that works in healthcare. Like for me, I had no knowledge of it from a personal standpoint except through my parents who, come home and talk about how Epic was just installed at their hospital. And instead I hear stories about that. So I feel like we all have tidbits of knowledge that come from it, and we really don't realize how much of my interaction with a doctor, my interaction with one of my friends who's a nurse, or my mom who's a speech pathologist, like how many of these issues touch those people and their workflows and their work-life balance, and then just how much of it even trickles down. For me, something that changed is I learned what informatics is. Even when I started with this podcast, I really couldn't articulate what it is, and now I'm at the point where I'm explaining it to other people. So that's just one life change.
We have graduate students when I was at Vanderbilt and at Penn where I've said, so now that you're in the graduate program, what is informatics? They don't know.
I mean, don't put me on the spot to do it now, but
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. But I will say this, Harris, thank you so much for saying this was my brainchild. But the reality really was that I wanted to get 3 to 4 people, of which two of whom were lay audience members, to talk to somebody who was an expert. And a lot of times I had to play the other lay audience member, even though obviously I'm not. You were at one point sort of the person who was going to bring a little bit more levity to the conversation. And we've evolved so that we all kind of went back and forth on those issues. I will never be as funny as you, but I tried the best I could try.
You're pretty close. You're pretty close.
Thank you. But yeah, so I think it worked. And I hope other people out there, if, by the way, there's somebody who listens to this and says, Kevin, Harris, Ellie, you guys make this incredible 3.0. We need you to do a new podcast. Is it okay if we give you each $1 million advance? I'm calling you. We're doing that.
Go for it.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Exactly.
Good.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure I wanted to make sure I cleared that up. We're not off the hook if we get picked up by somebody who's paying us each $1 million.
Absolutely.
I might even do it for 900,000.
I mean, I'd go as low as 800. I think that feels like a good number. Yeah.
I want to say, okay, you'll probably cut this out. You whore.
You don't have to cut that out. I am a whore. I know it. I'm just glad that you didn't use the term throuple when you were referring to the 3 of us.
I worked really hard not to.
I felt it. I could feel it about to happen,
Oh, geez. See, they're going to miss us. They're going to miss us so much.
Oh, yeah.
Right about now, there's somebody doing a spit take on their bike. They were an hour in. They've been listening and thinking, "Oh, this is it's been good. I've learned a lot." And then we just went through that little moment, or some of the things that we said with Melissa McFeeters. And in either case, they're like, "Stop it! You're choking me."
I think one thing for me was that we made informatics fun to listen to, which, some of these topics have been really dense and really heavy. I mean, when we had to talk about Roe or COVID, those are really dense and heavy topics, but I think we had people who, one, are used to trying to figure out how to communicate these things to broad audiences. And so they've thought about how can we make this a little bit more digestible. But then I think we've had some, self-deprecating humor that's really brought it back to saying, like, we don't know all the answers. And sometimes, these things are left to be explored. And so all the more reason to know as much as you can now so that when new topics arise, you have a little bit of information about it. I mean, AI is a great example of that.
Yep. I have to share with you an anecdote about this because Jane couldn't be here. And we know that Jane Bach, who is, as we mentioned, is in the studio, and I cannot wait to hear what she's producing. Jane, I will never forget, was on an episode with one of our faculty from Vanderbilt, whose name I won't say because of where I'm going to go with this. And that person was talking about precision medicine and made a comment about some of the really interesting algorithms that are able to identify very precisely populations within the EHR, including populations that might be vulnerable populations. Jane responded by saying, so, I worry a little bit about the privacy because, the Daily Fair had been on and had mentioned the fact that if you have a very rare disease, that even though we may think we're HIPAA safe harbor compliant, everything else, you have essentially identified a person without all of even with all the identifiers missing, because if you know the diagnosis and you know anything else about visits, you may be able to triangulate in on who it was. Her response is, could these things be used for evil as well as good? And are you doing anything to protect these algorithms so that they don't get in the hands of bad actors? And this member of the faculty had never thought of that.
Yeah.
And so what the conversation that ensued was essentially, it started with a comment like this. It was something like, well, I don't really think about that. I'm just trying to get papers published.
Yeah.
In my heart, I thought, okay, we're now going to have an entire noon conference about the ethics of precision medicine and stuff that you're building that could be used for harm. You need to know that and be ready to answer that question, because there will be a government in 2025 who might want to ask you that question, for example.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
I think, that's such a great point. And I remember that conversation. And I think that's one reason that, when we have these talks about informatics, we have to remember that most people assume we have the ethical conversations in the midst of it, because they think, oh, y'all work in healthcare, and in healthcare, you're supposed to do no harm.
Right.
Even though that is only applicable, I guess, to MDs and DOs, it really is. I mean, the broad audience assumes in healthcare we do no harm. And so even in a space where we are sitting in front of computers with servers and thinking about, lines of code and data, we do have to think, oh, we are in charge of doing no harm. And so we have to think about those things. And a lot of the times I do think it's easy to think, oh, but I want to get this really cool paper out. But really, we also have to consider that as well.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's another good this podcast has done, is open that channel of communication from both ways, from the lay people to the scientists, because as one of the clips mentioned earlier, we might not know what questions the general population are asking, and it could be one like Jane's that brings up a very good point that I say we, me not being a scientist, but you all are asking something are we in touch with what everyone is thinking? And I think that's a question that's in so many different spheres of our culture right now, is do we know what the other person is thinking, and do we know it accurately? So I appreciate that this podcast has we decided we're going to speak each other's languages, and we're going to kind of cross that expertise divide between us. And I hope people like me and people like some of the musicians on our episodes feel even more empowered to speak the language of informatics so that they can make contributions to the field from outside of it. I think that's a cool part of what you guys have been doing.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when we did this podcast from, the 5 years, COVID really hasn't left. And we still have COVID, and we have now other health concerns that are similar to COVID. I mean, Bradley School is now closed for the next 3 days because so many people are sick. There's not enough people to attend or teach.
Wow.
And so 20 years ago when I was in grade school, I would have never imagined that schools would just shut down for the flu and, and things like that. Now we live in this era where that can happen. And, I think COVID and thinking about health and the way that we talk about health has really changed in the past 5 years. We had to public health officials had to teach people what mRNA vaccines are. They had never heard them. They sound scary. It sounds like it could be something that's dangerous, but it had been something in the field for decades that have been discussed and worked on, and trials have been done. And so we've really had to re-examine as a society, how do we talk about health, especially these topics that we don't know very well. And then when you do hear those things out in an audience that might not have the right information, you feel comfortable saying, well, hey, I learned this on a podcast, or I was talking to this person, and this is what I think this means. And so I do think it trickles out to have a better effect on how to communicate about it.
Yep. And I hope that we did that. So I want to take a moment to just thank you, Harris, for everything you've done for all of these episodes, including this one, of course. And thank you, Ellie, for kind of bringing us into a completely new and better platform for us to communicate those messages. And I'm going to miss all you guys. This has really been a lot of fun.
Yeah, likewise. I said, Kevin, what's next for you?
I always worry a little bit about talking about projects that aren't done. So I do have a couple of project ideas. The one that I'm a little bit more comfortable sharing is, that I have this children's book series, and it's called Who Me, Who, comma Me, question mark. And I have 2 co-editors with that book series. All of us are on World Scientific Publishing. I got a lot of people asking me about my entire memoir. And so I'm now using Substack, and I'm drafting basically a chapter a month. It's called The Influencers, for people who want to go look for it. It's out there. I would love to have you subscribe to it and kind of give me feedback, because to pitch this to an agent, I have to basically have an outline. And for me to make the outline work, I'm going to basically write bad versions of all the chapters, right? So that people can say, this is a good chapter, but you missed this part. I add all that to the outline. So that's one thing. The other thing is that Rob would love for me to be doing less.
No, yeah.
So I think one of the plans is to, breathe in, breathe out, not have to need, drugs to help me go to sleep at night, and all that other stuff. I have a couple of other fun projects Ellie knows about, and Ellie will have a couple of big announcements in the next few months about some work that she and I have been doing. So,
oh, snap.
Yeah, I mean, seriously cool stuff. Like, I can barely contain myself, but I am going to contain myself. And then we'll see. Hopefully you. Now, what about you, Harris, aside from graduating?
Yeah, so working on the PhD still. That's been coming along really nicely. Had to take a little bit of a break as I had some family stuff to deal with and everything. But that's been going really well. Pretty excited about that. And then after that, I would love to maybe start my own lab and do some research in the testosterone and estrogen spaces. I see it being very intersectional, especially like on women's health issues and LGBT issues. But I've really started to like being more in the biomedical informatics space and the research space. So I don't think I can get away from that either.
Yay!
Right?
Good for you. Great.
He's like, I converted you.
Yes.
Yeah. Evangelist.
And so, Ellie, as we're going out, tell us any summary of what you're hoping to do next.
Oh wow. I'm open-minded to what the future holds. So maybe in a year or 2 I'll be back in school, or maybe you'll see more writing for me out in the world. We're building a Substack too. Just I'm not sharing the name of it with any of you yet. So I'm just hoping to do to do more writing.
Well, everybody, I wish we need a song to exit. So let's, and we don't, if we had an audience, we could ask them to kind of give us a quick poll. So if you could summarize, I'm going to put us all on the spot, and I'll go first just because it'll prove how hard this is. The question I'm going to ask is, if we could get permission to get some small excerpt of a song that we think summarizes what we've been trying to do, what would that song be? So while you guys think about it, and I'll think about it, I guarantee I'm going to go first. So I would say,
This is sad.
This is hard. Why?
I know
these ideas.
I know already.
Yeah.
Mine would be the theme song to Baywatch.
Why?
Listen to it. It's all about helping others.
Oh.
I've also been watching a lot of Baywatch.
Maybe I'll call David Hasselhoff and see if he'll let us use it.
Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah. Is he still taking your calls?
I have to tell him I'm you, and then I usually can get through.
Yeah.
All right, guys. You clowns. It was great. Until next time, thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Sometimes life can knock the breath right out of you. You entertain your darkest thoughts and you let your demons shout at you, telling you to just give up. No, hey, you're not good enough. Well, you don't have to take that stuff. Get tough and push back, push back. Make that broken heart your breakthrough. Push back, push back. You're stronger than the thing that breaks you. When hard times push down on you, push back, push back, push back. Sometimes you get sick and tired of the sound of slamming doors, and you wonder what in the world you were even put here for. Can't hardly count the tears you've cried. You wanna run, you wanna hide, then something pulls that switch inside, and you decide to push back, push back. Make that broken heart your breakthrough. Push back, push back. You're stronger than the thing that breaks you. When hard times push down on you, push back, push back, push back. That switch inside. Push back, push back, push back, push back. Make that broken heart your breakthrough. Push back, push back. You're stronger than the thing that breaks you. When hard times push down on you, push back, push back, push back. When hard times push down on you, push back, push back, push back.